Welcome to Sikhcast, brought to you by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.
Introducing Paigham-i-Goya, Expression of Love, new translations of a selection of ghazals from Bhai Nand Lal Goya. Today's podcast begins with the recitation of Bhai Nand Lal's ghazal in Persian, followed by a new English transcreation, the result of a unique collaboration between Dr. Fatima Fayyaz and Dr. Nadhra Khan of Lahore University of Management Sciences, Damanpreet Singh, writer and graduate student, and Inni Kaur of SikhRI, followed by a discussion between Daman and Inni about the beauty of the ghazal and the transcreation process.
ز فیض مقدمت ای آب روی فصل بهار، جهان چو باغ ارم پر شده است از گلزار. تبسم تو جهان را حیات می بخشد، قرار دیده صاحب دلان پر اسرار. به غیر عشق خدا هیچ عشق قائم نیست، به غیر عاشقی مولا همه فناپندار. به هر طرف که نگاه کنی روان بخشی، نگاه توست که در هر طرف بود جاندار. خدا که در همه حال است حاضر و ناظر، کجاست دیده که بیند به هر طرف دیدار. به غیر عارف مولا کسی نجات نیافت، اجل زمین و زمان را گرفته در منقار. همیشه زنده بود بنده خدا گویا، که غیر بندگیش نیست در جهان آثار.
O pride of spring, with the grace of your arrival, the world, just like the garden of paradise, abounds with flowers. Your smile graces the world with life. It is the ointment that soothes the eyes of men whose hearts can discern divine secrets. No love can last unless graced by divine love. All shall be annihilated other than the one in love with the divine. Everywhere you look, you grace life. It is your gaze that bestows life in every direction. The divine is always present and watchful. Where is the eye that can witness these manifestations in every direction? It is only the divine's mystic who attains liberation, as time and space are held in the beak of fate. Goya, the divine slave becomes immortal, as other than this bondage, nothing in the world has permanence.
Guru Fatehji, welcome to another episode of Ghazal number, I believe it's Ghazal number 36. This is Inni Kaur in conversation with Damanpreet Singh. Yes, this is Ghazal number 36 from the Bhai Nand Lal collection, Divan-i-Goya. Welcome, Daman, and congratulations. I hear you are an uncle. So how does it feel?
I am. Thank you so much. It's good to be back. And it's interesting because we're going to be talking about life today. And it's been, the last 2 weeks I've been helping welcome a new life in the family. So this will be fun to think about today with you. And I'm excited to be here.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. This is really, I know all ghazals are special, but this one is also quite special, Daman. I know you feel the same way. So, but before we begin the ghazal, before I begin talking about the couplet, we have that repeated word in the ghazal, which we always share with our listeners. So, Daman, what is a repeated word, and walk us through that, please?
Yeah, so this week we have something a little bit different from what we've seen in the past, because the repeat at the end of each couplet is actually not a full word, but just a sound. And it's the long A and R sound. So there is a rhythmic pattern with the rhyming as usual in this couplet in the original Persian, but it's not actually the same word. And at different times, we've even seen the same phrase repeated at the end of each couplet. But in this case, we just have the long A and the R sound. So that's a little bit different from what we've done with the ghazals that we've looked at so far.
But we haven't been able to do the rhyming. We have not done that.
We didn't even try. That was impossible. Right. Yeah, so that actually, maybe we should talk about that, because I think in the past, when it is a word or a phrase or like a particular tense, like last month we had the same verb ending in each couplet. And in those cases, we can try to maintain some sort of flow in English with having the same translation as much as possible in the English. But with the sound, that's just absolutely impossible. So that might be something for readers and listeners who have been following along with us. If this felt a little bit different in its flow, that might be one of the reasons why. In terms of the English translation, I should say.
Right. But I would encourage our listeners to listen to the Farsi, because you'll get that rhythm and that sweetness and rhyme over there. Yeah. Even though, the comprehension may not be there, but at least you'll get the flow of it. Mm-hmm. So, Daman, should we begin with the first one?
Yes, let's.
Okay. So the first one, the couplet number 1, O pride of spring, with the grace of your arrival, the world, just like the garden of paradise, abounds with flowers. These are such exquisite words which are used in this couplet. I mean, I know we've translated them and I'm calling them exquisite, but really it is quite exquisite. And in the first line, it's literal. The literal is your footsteps. That has a very, it has a much stronger connotation because in the language, it is when you enter your footstep and the lover knows the beloved has come. The connection is so tight in Urdu poetry and in that genre. It's all about placing of the foot. And in the second line, it's in the garden where you have placed your feet. That place is filled with flowers and greenery, and that is continuously happening. I mean, the garden is always, is blooming, but where you've put your foot that's the place is just flourishing. So that has made the garden even more beautiful, lush, and overflowing with flowers. I think the word here, the two words, Gulzar and Bahar. Mm-hmm. I mean, both of these are extremely visual representations, we can say. And, I can really feel and see what is happening and what Goya is saying. Sometimes I feel myself swaying, getting swooped up in this emotion. And I don't know. Am I just being the hopeless romantic that I am over here? Or maybe there's something to it, or I'm just a die-hard, one of those, the last one standing. Who knows? So Daman, make sense of this.
Yeah, no, I think you've really helped me make sense of it. Yeah, I think the imagery throughout this ghazal is really incredible. And in this couplet, just, right out the gate, we have this really beautiful image of spring and life. And the word gulzar, as you're saying, which is the last word of the second line, which suggests either a rose garden, or if not a rose garden, a garden that is incredibly bountiful and in full bloom. And it's being compared here, like you're saying, to the Garden of Paradise, which is always in bloom, right? Mm-hmm. So right. I think I'm interested also in this juxtaposition of the world that gets spring once a year and the Garden of Paradise, which is always in springtime. and is always bountiful. And what do we do? What are the emotions that come with the arrival of spring? With which here we have the grace of the arrival of spring, which feels special every year, and it's an exciting time, allergies aside, etc. so, so I think I'm really taken by this juxtaposition of the world which gets the grace once a year versus that garden of paradise, which always is in full bloom. And yeah, I think this image will recur in a really interesting way in terms of life and death, and what kind of life does spring bring with it.
Mm-hmm. The way the words are used, it is when the foot is placed in that garden, that area has become Gulzar, right? So to me, that is going to be like that in paradise,
right?
Because you have placed your feet, your feet there. That's what I think.
Yeah.
Who knows whether I'm right or wrong? It really doesn't matter. It's just an emotion and the feeling, and puts you in a different mood. So the second couplet, Daman, is your smile graces the world with life. It is the ointment that soothes the eyes of men whose hearts can discern divine secrets. Ah, your smile is that extract, is that balm that soothes the eyes of men whose hearts are filled with wisdom. So these are not ordinary men, those hearts that have a special understanding of the divine secret. So Daman, in the first couplets, it was footsteps, and now it's the smile, both physical attributes. Thoughts on that?
Right. So as you're saying, there's the feet and the arrival of the footstep, which brings with it bounty and life. And now there's smile, which is the smile, which is an ointment and is also gracing the world with life. So again, I think it's interesting to note that, again, we have the world, which is coming alive in some way in both of these first two couplets. And then we get very specific here in the second line with the eyes of the men whose hearts can discern divine secrets. And this was the specific phrase, the men whose hearts can discern divine secrets. That was something that we discussed quite a bit as a team. Another way to translate this would have been perhaps the men whose hearts are full of divine secrets, which I think suggests something else in terms of, again, like the garden imagery, an image of plenty and of bounty. But we wanted to get a little bit more specific. So we went with those whose hearts can discern divine secrets, are soothed by the arrival that happens, that is a rare occurrence, or an arrival that's like much awaited, or an arrival that like is something that you look forward to for a long time. And then that arrival serves as like a brief ointment for these men whose hearts can discern divine secrets. These men whose hearts in some ways are full of divine secrets, kind of evoking again this imagery of the garden of paradise that is always in bloom. So I'm interested in this. The world, so it seems to me that there's like the world, there's the garden, there's the world and the earthly realm. And then there's the realm of like the garden of paradise. And now there's the realm of the heart. And amidst all of this is this arrival of the beloved.
While you were talking, the image came to mind was it is the lover who knows, who's waiting, right? And the eyes are just longing and longing and longing. And it's that arrival, that smile becomes that ointment that soothes, because your eyes are so tired of waiting.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, the hearts that can discern divine secrets, it's a lover that knows.
Mm-hmm.
They already know the secret, whether it's the secret of love, it is the secret. And so that to me was, of course, it's only what would suit the eyes for the lover. It is the smile of the beloved. And that would be would be that. But it's interesting for me, it is the eyes of men, because the eye can see so much. It is the eye, discerning eye that knows. And Barney also, we say that it's, it is the jeweler. The jewel is there, but you have the eyes to see it. Do you know how to see it?
Yeah.
You know the value of the jewel. So that is, there's a play over here. And I think something like this comes later on in another couplet in this ghazal too, because I remember reading that, and now I'm connecting it. It's amazing when we speak, that other things come up, which when you are doing it by yourself and you're preparing for it, you don't have those thoughts.
I mean, this is what I think both of us really value from this podcast is I always come away just like having a completely different understanding of whatever puzzle we're talking about, even after, we've all spent, the four of us have spent so much time on each line, on each word, but even still, more comes with each discussion and each reading. But as you were just talking so I'm reminded of the line from Farid, which I'm not going to quote in the original Punjabi, but the line that translates something like, don't touch these eyes because I what is I'm not going to do the translation justice, but in effect, don't touch these eyes because I want, I have the desire to see the beloved again. So, and then we've seen this a lot now that I think of it, in terms of the eyes and the heart are these two images that Nand Lal returns to over and over again. And I'm also reminded of this short thing that I'll read, but we'll add a citation to this, but I'm reminded of this small passage that someone had sent me, called The Vastness of the Heart. And it says, I saw him on the streets of the hidden with something in his hand. I said, my God, what is this? He said, your heart. I said, has my heart such a station that it lies in your hand? He gazed at my heart, and it was like something folded up, so he spread it out, and my heart covered the space from the throne to the earth. I said, this is my heart? He said, this is your heart, and it's the vastest thing in existence. He took it as it was still in his hand to the angelic regions, and I went with him until I reached the treasury of the hidden of the hidden. I said, where are you taking it? And he said, to the world of eternity, so that I may look in it and create the wonders of reality in it, and forever manifest myself in it with the attribute of divinity.
Lovely. And the heart is so vast, and the eyes, and the, when you were reading, when you were talking about Farid, in the opera Soni and Mahibal, and it's when Soni is in the river in the Chenab, she's dying, and she's plunged and she's drowning. For our readers, for our listeners, Soni and Mahibal is one of the love stories of Punjab, epic love stories. And Soni goes across the Chenab every night to meet Mahibal. This particular night, it's very stormy. She dives into the Chenab, and the clay pot, the earthen pot that she uses to lift her, starts to disintegrate. And she then calls out to the elements, and she speaks to the fish, and she says, you can take every part of my body and devour it, I care not, but leave my eyes, because in my eyes resides Mahibal. And, and so the eyes are so special in every part of the poetry, that they hold such a treasure, and they're used with such care in Urdu and Persian, and even in Punjabi poetry. They are used with care. Yeah, but it is the ointment that soothes the eyes of men whose hearts can discern divine secret. And what if I said, it is the ointment that soothes the eyes of lover whose hearts hold their love in secret.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's the eyes that need the ointment, right? I mean, I think this is something that is in, I think maybe in our, one, it's not the heart, the broken heart that needs, it's,
No,
it's actually the eyes.
it is the eyes, because they are waiting for that, and they already know they know the secret is there. They know they're waiting for that arrival, for that longing, for that grace, for whatever that is. I mean, the next couplet, Daman, is probably one of my favorites. No love can last unless graced by divine love. All shall be annihilated other than the one in love with the divine. And here, the word ishq is used. And
Mm-hmm.
when the four of us were translating this and working on this, Nadhra said something which made me pause, because when we translate ishq into love, we actually narrow it. Because ishq has its own story, which the word love does not and cannot capture.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the language, and that's the what every language has certain words that carry so much with them. And I remember Nadra saying this: love is another bird, ishq is something else.
Mm-hmm.
And that made me really think. So I went on a search. I asked a couple of my friends, Urdu speaking friends who love poetry, like, what is ishq to you? Tell me, what is it? Lovely conversations. I'm just going to, give you what they said. They said literally it's translated, it means love. But ishq is, but the word love, they said, does not carry the intensity, the madness, and the poetic depth of ishq.
Mm-hmm.
Ishq is love at its finest, both in terms of aesthetics and impact. And they were saying, then they said, Inni, without ishq, there would be no ghazals, those beautiful poetic gems. Without ishq, there's no shairi, no poetry. Without ishq, there are no poems, no short stories, no art within the realm of Urdu poetry. Ishq is where all art is born. Ishq is where all art goes to die. So this, I loved that, where they said, it is, everything grows from there, comes from there, and everything gets immersed in there. And then this is what I read. Ishq is the purest manifestation of all human emotions. It is the peak, the ultimate high, the essence of our emotional core. I guess no wonder poets blame ishq for the creation of this universe and for the destruction of it as well.
Right.
So ishq is a force I know to reckon with, and it's often, many times, I cannot say this enough, life altering or destroying, depending on who you ask. It's a force which enters you. It's like an earthquake, and the tremors continue to rock your life after the event. But it is, make no mistake about it, when it enters your life, it has entered. And all your, these petty boundaries you've made with yourselves, and these pacts that you've made with yourself, that you must do this and that, they literally go out of the window. But what made me really pause was the next thing. It doesn't matter if our ishq leads us to that zenith or not. It doesn't matter whether our ishq happens to be for our God, for our beloved, for our family, for our work, for our art. What matters is that we lose ourselves to the depths of our ishq and let it define our lives, our very being. And more often than not, that alone is enough. And our ishq can only be one. There cannot be multiple ishqs. Can there be multiple loves? Now, tell me, Daman, does our word love cover even a smidgen of that, what I have described? Honestly, I know I went overboard in explaining the depth of the word ishq, but I think that's what happens when we get into these ghazals and certain words. You just feel that you need to delve into them. I think I could write an essay on this word, and I think maybe I will at some point. I don't know who will publish it, but the thought is there.
I think you should. I think that right. I think this is something that we've it's a hard thing to have to translate into English, because I think English just doesn't work at a lot of levels in terms of the beauty of the Persian, and also the beauty of various other languages in the world that have much more nuanced ways of thinking about something like love. But right, we've noted this, I think, with the word beloved. We've translated the word so many different words in the Persian as beloved, right? Yar or dost or dilruba or whatever, right? We've had so many, and each of these means something so specific. And I think what you're explaining is really helpful in terms of what does ishq mean? Why is he using the word ishq here and not any other word? Any of the other words he has access to in Persian for love. And I think that's really, again, that's just something that's not going to come through in a translation, which is one of the tragedies of translation is, all of that.
I read somewhere that ishq, like there are 7 stages of ishq. And the first one is attraction, if I'm correct, infatuation. Then there's love. I think then there is devotion, respect. And I think the last one, there's madness somewhere in there. And the last one is death.
Right.
And that made me like, death? Yes. And then in this one, when I read that, it's when I read it first, it was like, ooh, and then it made sense.
Yeah.
That there is a dying, there's a dying.
Well, I think I'm glad you pointed that out. So I think there's 2 things here that I'm interested in. Well, there's lots that I'm interested in, but 2 things that I would want to note. The annihilation and destruction thing is interesting. And later, I think in the last couplet, we'll see the invocation of bandagi, which we've translated as bondage. And we've had it also in the past, in the first ghazal, where we translated it as reverence - bondage. Mm-hmm. So, as 2 different stages that you've just named of ishq, are coming up in this ghazal in different couplets, which I think is really interesting. But the other thing that I think is interesting specific to these 2 lines is that in the first couplet, no love can last unless graced by divine love, we have in some way kind of a hierarchy of loves, right? So we have, he's using the same word importantly for the English speakers among us to know that it is ishq in both cases, but it's love of the divine, or khuda is the word he uses here. So one could say, love of God, and love, so it's ishq khuda and ishq, which we've translated as love and divine love. So there's, in addition to all of the complexity that you're pointing out, there's even further complexities introducing us by this distinction between there's a particular kind of divine love and there's all these other kinds of love. So there's like so many layers in addition to there's the 7 stages, and then on top of the 7 stages, there's like even multiple types of ishq that he's pointing out. And all shall be annihilated, if that divine love isn't there. And here it's ashik is the word he uses, which is literally lover. And we've translated as the one in love. So we have ishq, and then the one who is performing the love is the ashik in the second line. But all those who are not in love with the divine, don't have this divine love, are not lovers of the divine, are annihilated regardless of the nature of this other kind of love. The way in which he's playing with the word ishq and has it in two different forms, and then ashik as the lover, I think is really interesting.
So, I mean, there is a thought that when you are in love with divine, that divine love, and when that love, when divinity enters your love, so the two things, I want to share with you, it's eternal.
Right.
So, the part of dying doesn't enter, it becomes eternal. That love becomes eternal. You become eternal. It's your consciousness, and it's there. But it's very interesting the way he is using it. And then, I think it sounds much better in Farsi than what we have. Ours is still, I feel it's closing in. It's not allowing it to breathe. That, the imagination is not working in English, while in the Farsi it was working very well.
Yeah.
At least I thought so too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a really nice parallel structure,
Right.
In the original, and like if we were to do a word for word translation, we would also switch the order. So it would say, the love of the divine, or love of God, or divine love comes first, and then the other love comes second, given the grammatical structure. But that structure doesn't quite work in English.
Right. So then the fourth couplet. Everywhere you look, you grace life. It is your gaze that bestows life in every direction. Can you feel the beauty in this couplet?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's again, you're gracing life. It's just your look that gives life in every direction. How powerful is that?
Yeah, and so we've had now the arrival with the footsteps, the smile, and now we have the gaze and the eyes of the beloved, and not the eyes of the lover, or the gaze of the beloved and not the gaze of the lover in this case. Honestly, if I'm honest, reading these couplets about springtime and the gracing of life and bounty, as we live through like one of the worst heat waves recorded ever in thousands of generations over the past couple of weeks across the world. I mean, I'm in New York, and we had a heat wave, but the roads melting in the Pacific Northwest, and like half of Canada's trees burning. It makes me wonder, it's a difficult thing to be reading these lines and not think about the catastrophes that we're living through, and kind of the ways in which, what would it be to actually like recognize and be in line with the arrival of, or the footsteps of, or the smile of the beloved, who is the one that's bestowing life in every direction, as he puts it in this line, right? So that's kind of what I was trying to think about. What kind of love is it? If we wanted to go back to the question of ishq, what kind of love is required, right? For us to actually be in a world where we're like accepting the grace of life and accepting the grace of bounty that is like part of the world in which we live, but is actively being decimated.
So this is the word which is, awe, which comes up in Asakibar, right? We use the word awe, inspiring, awe, because it's good when we think of things which we consider good. The blooming of the flower, the gorgeous, the sunset and all. But awe is also used when there is destruction. To be in awe of an acceptance. So there's that acceptance which is there. And when this was actually, I hadn't thought about that. It was when you were saying, what kind of that. It was to accept the awe of and be in awe, because that's what it is. Bismarck, be in awe of everything that was happening, and the acceptance of the command, the capital C as we call it at SikhRI. That is it. So, Daman, there was this word in this ghazal, in this couplet, which I thought, we went back and forth with the word baksh. I think that's the word. Do you want to just take our listeners to, the different meaning of that word and how we chose grace?
Yeah, so here we have Bakshi at the end of the line. The first line, I should say, which we have here as "you grace life." And this is, of course, a word that comes from the Persian, and we also have in Punjabi and other South Asian languages. It comes up in Gurbani. And there's, I think, so many connotations of this word. And grace, we could continue to go back and forth, but I think there's a connotation of mercy and the state of being merciful that comes with the idea of baksh. And then I think there's also a suggestion of bestowing and providing and, even kind of forgiving. So I think there's so many different layers to the word. And again, it's one of these words that just doesn't have quite a perfect translation in English. We've went with grace, I think, both in terms of the pace of the couplet, but also in terms of, capturing. I think grace is a word that's broad enough in English that it actually captures some of these different meanings. And grace itself is a word that in English, I think I often, when I see the word grace, I often pause and think about, what exactly does that mean? But yeah, it is something that one could think about, everywhere you look, you forgive life is a very different, potentially very different line from you grace life. Yeah, that's something that, different people might have different interpretations of.
Right. So we move to the fifth couplet. The divine is always present and watchful. Where is the eye that can witness these manifestations in every direction? Again, we have the eye, right? And this couplet actually reminds me of what we, grace is always present. Are you receiving it? Do you feel it? And people always say, well, bakshish when it is. No, the divine is always present. It's always that. Do you feel the presence? Are you living in the presence? In that moment. And this one, particularly this couplet, reminded me of the Sakhi of Guru Nanak Sahib and Bhai Mardana, where he sends Bhai Mardana to the town with that ruby. And, Mardana goes to shop after shop and they give him nothing. And they call it a stone and they give him nothing until he goes to this one person. And this one person says, keep the rubies. I think Cialis Rai. He says, keep the ruby, and he gives him money. He says, thank you for me viewing this. Because that was the eye that could see. That was the eye that could put a value to what it was seeing. So the divine is all around us. Do we have the eyes? Are we seeing that manifestation of creation all around us?
Mm-hmm. There's the question again of sight and the ability to see. There's two aspects of the question of sight that we've seen now repeatedly in this ghazal. There's the eye of the lover, or the eye who seeks the lover, the eye of the hearts that are of the men that are full of divine secrets. And then there's the gaze of the divine, the beloved. In the previous line where we've seen the gaze of the divine, it's the gaze that bestows life in every direction. And here, once again, we have this idea of the divine's gaze is always present and always watchful. And the question you're posing is, are we present to, or are we able to witness? Are we able to recognize and be in awe of creation and be in line with capital C command and recognize capital C command as always and all around us? The question that's being asked in the second line is really interesting because the question is where, not what is or whose is it. The question is where is the I? So I think that's kind of, I don't know what to make of that, but that's kind of intriguing. That he's kind of searching for the I. Where is the I? Is it, does it belong to the men who can just, whose hearts are full of secrets and so on? But the other thing that comes to mind with this line, and again, not to bring it back, but it's impossible not to bring it back to like the present catastrophes, is that it does seem to me that there's, so there's in Ghazal 30, which we did last month, there's a line about the value of 1,000 heavens being not even worth half a grain of barley, because where we are is beyond even the reach of monarchs. I think that's close-ish to how we translated it.
Right.
And I wonder, if Nand Lal was writing today, this is kind of the question that we were trying to ask last month, for those who might have listened to the podcast, is, what does he mean by a grain of barley, which arguably isn't worth much, and 1,000 heavens arguably are worth, lots and lots and lots. But for the kings or whatever, for the monarchs about whom he writes, the grain of barley is worth so much that they're missing the 1,000 heavens. They're missing, the need to go to the dust, become the dust of the threshold of the divine or of the beloved. So I'm just curious, is a grain of barley, oil, crude oil or whatever in the present day in terms of the way in which we treat the earth? And it's all, it's entirely about extraction and exploitation, rather than being in awe and recognizing that the divine is always present and watchful, and being in awe of the divine's creation, the way in which we live in the world, from everything from the polluted cities we live in to like the mass destruction. The ocean was on fire this past week. But this is early, I should say. We're recording this in early July. I'm sure when this goes up in 2-3 weeks, there's other catastrophes that have like blown our minds. And we've even forgotten that the ocean was on fire in early July.
And that's why I'm the hopeless romantic. None of these thoughts enter me when I'm reading Bhai Nand Lal. I can assure you that. It is Bhai Nand Lal and myself, and we are on a different plane altogether. There's none of this what's happening. For me, it is like, when I translate, when you were saying, oh, where is that I that can see, that can witness this manifestation? It really is, if I speak to myself, you know that the divine is always present in Inni Kaur, but where is that I that can witness this? And it's basically a question to myself. Like, you haven't sharpened that eye. You don't even know what to look for. And therefore, while you know it intellectually, you cannot see it. I mean, we say these things, but until we don't experience it, it doesn't enter our consciousness, and that's what it is. Oh, the hopeless romantic and the pragmatic.
Well,
Fine area.
That should be the name of our podcast.
The next one, right? Who will listen? I don't know. I mean, here everyone is very kind because they think they're getting a little bit of Bhai Nand Lal, but who knows what they're getting. All righty. So we move to couplet number 6. This is under the guise of Bhai Nand Lal. We're having these conversations. So couplet, yes, a wonderful excuse. But honestly, Daman, I've had the best time with these ghazals. They really have stretched and really enriched my life. And when I'm working with them or they are working with me, it slows you down. It makes you pause and just sometimes smile and sometimes wonder, like, why am I not thinking like that? That thought just transports you. And that's the power of the word. It can still move you centuries later.
Mm-hmm.
So the couplet number 6. It is only the divine's mystic who attains liberation, as time and space are held in the beak of faith. Fate. As time and space are held in the beak of fate. Do you want to unpack this for us, Daman?
Yeah, this was a hard one. I want to start with the formulation, the divine's mystic. who is able to attain liberation. It's a formulation. He's not using the word ashik anymore. He's using the word mystic. He's not using the word lover. He's using the word mystic. Arguably, talking about the same person or whatever, the same type of person. But I want to point that out. In the second line, we have time and space are held in the beak of fate. So we have here a sense of fate in the English is suggesting some sort of like predestination, right? There's some sort of like predictability to, fate suggests destiny. Fate suggests that there's something that's, somewhat predictable, perhaps. At least how I'm understanding it in English. And time and space are wrapped up in, more than wrapped up, are like entirely in the control of fate. And it seems to me that to recognize that the divine is always present and watchful, to recognize the grace of the arrival of the footsteps of the divine, to recognize the smile of the divine, etc. To get that liberation, one needs to understand time and space being held in the beak of fate. And I am also thinking about a particular shabad where there is a line that I'll roughly translate based on my limited knowledge, but something to the effect of, one who contemplates time is the one who becomes the banda, the slave, however you want to translate that. Of course, bandagi we'll see in the next couplet also, but the slave or the divine or the one who's bonded to the divine is the one who reflects on the nature, the character of time. And this, it seems to me, and then, the Shabad goes on about, the impossibility of knowing all of creation, the necessity to be in awe, the need to be in awe, etc. It seems to me kind of a similar thought to, that which we occupy in time and in space as humans, contemplating the character that is what leads to this, what we have translated as liberation.
But what's interesting here is only the mystic is liberated beyond time and space limitation, right? Because the mystic is free from the bondage of time and space. The mystic is already in that space of which was before that eternal space that, in the previous, I think it was in one of the previous couplets, where there's a eternality that comes into being, where you are not held anymore. You're not in bondage anymore. It's that love. When you enter that divine love, it frees you and it makes you eternal.
Right. But that it seems that bondage is what, that liberation is the bondage. No?
And it's yes, the liberation is the bondage, and that is really the beauty of the word liberation. When you think you're really free, you are actually more tied than anything else.
Right.
Because now you're actually immersed in that. And yes, there is freedom, because there's the freedom to fly, the freedom that all other holds no longer hold you except this.
Right.
Except this bondage.
Right.
Which you have given willingly, and you're a willing slave, and all that goes with it. And then we come to the last one. Goya, the divine slave becomes immortal. As other than this bondage, nothing in the world has permanence. What an exquisite way. I think I've used exquisite way too many times this time. That I'm getting tired of it myself. It really is. The divine slave becomes immortal. I mean, this is where it's only when one adopts and embraces this bondage, which you were talking about earlier, one becomes immortal. So to become immortal, embrace the bondage. But then here, this one particularly reminds me of in Mool Mantra, the Akal quality. How do you become timeless? And to become timeless, you have to experience You have to be in a bondage to experience that eternal love. And that's how you conquer. Well, I don't want to conquer is a hard word. And that's why time and space no longer have a hold on you. It doesn't really matter. And at the end of the day, we all want to be timeless. We all want to be eternal. And this is one way to be in love, in that love of that which can make you eternal, which that raises your consciousness, that you give up everything, and you really don't give up. You get immersed in it. But divine slave, again, we had, especially in today's connotation, the word slave, and we've talked about it before in previous podcasts. It's a hard word for people to take because all of a sudden it has, I think mentally you kind of freeze at that word.
Yeah, and we've had it before, as you're saying. Yeah, I think just would be important for listeners to recall that the context in which Bhai Nand Lal was writing, the word bande, which he uses for slave, has a very particular connotation in terms of in Sufi thought, and in terms of even in Gurbani, we see this word all the time. So, there's no real, well, perhaps there is, but we weren't able to figure out another way to translate the word bande into English other than slave. But, of course, this isn't a relationship of ownership.
Right.
This isn't the relationship of, chattel slavery, of course. So this is something that, listeners should just keep in mind in terms of the historical context in which he's writing and, the way in which we translate it in English. But as we've noted with other words in this ghazal as well, it's hard, especially when dealing with a language as rich as the Persian in which Bhai Nand Lal is writing. It's often very difficult to find a word. And then for bande in specifically, there isn't really another word in English that would convey the meaning of the word. I think I would want to point out, as you've done already, Inni, is the question of immortality is really interesting in terms of, one, liberation is bondage. Liberation is like becoming aware of the fact that time and space are held in the beak of fate, perhaps. But also liberation is the state of immortality. So this contradiction of liberation and bondage and becoming a slave to become immortal, I think is really interesting. In this particular ghazal, we've seen throughout this question of life and annihilation and these kind of opposites that he's playing with throughout.
But it's interesting the way he ends it as other than this bondage. So again, we have this bondage. That's the only thing that's permanent. Nothing in the world has permanent. So it's love. It's that love that is permanent.
Right. The divine love.
Right. So, I know we say divine love. To me, love is when divinity enters your love. Other than that, you're just flirting with it. You're not in it. And it is when that devotion and reverence enters, that's when it becomes love. Until then, it is something else. It may be infatuation. It may be a whole lot of other things. But love by itself is quite different. Thoughts as we end, Daman.
This ghazal is really, I think I might have said this in ghazal 30 as well, but I think I'm excited to hear what listeners think, because this one we're kind of seeing so many different sides of Nand Lal's writing throughout the months, but in this ghazal we see kind of all of it. I'm kind of seeing it as like a lot of the different voices of Nand Lal we've seen so far are coming through in this ghazal in an interesting way, and that might just be because I'm becoming more and more familiar with him. But we have the like very intimate lines in terms of, the smile and the footsteps and the eyes of the divine and of the beloved. And then we also have these very kind of broad, sweeping lines about time and space being held in the beak of fate and the attainment of, attaining liberation and immortality. So I think this one is particularly, I'm excited to hear what people think and people's interpretations. And as is probably clear to listeners, as we talk about it, we have questions and continue to have questions.
So thank you so much for sending us your emails. We've enjoyed reading them, Daman and I. We're quite humbled by your generosity. You've been very kind in your emails. If you want to drop us a line, just email us at info@sikhri.org and we'll get it. And thank you once again. So thank you, Daman. This was another enjoyable, very enjoyable podcast. And I will keep it in mind for maybe you and I can start another one, the romantic and the pragmatic. Let's ponder, let's sleep on it, and let's see where it leads us. All righty. Good night, everyone. Guru Fateh. We'll tune in next month for another episode with Daman Singh and Inni Kaur and Bhai Nand Lal.
You were listening to Sikhcast by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.